everyone. May peace be on you all, and welcome to another episode of I'm a Muslim and That's Okay. And as always, I'm your host, Shella, and I am back with a gift of the gab featuring a very special guest of mine, Dr. Nour Akhras. You're a pediatrician, Dr. Nour. And I was just reading your bio. You graduated from Rush Medical College, and you also have a bachelor's in cellular and molecular biology. I was like, oh, wow, as if being a doctor wasn't enough. But how are you, Dr. Akhras?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on your show. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm the honor is all mine because here I am, and I don't have you here because you're a pediatrician. Although I'm not saying that's not important, finding a good kid doctor is very hard. But the reason I have you here, Dr. Akhras, is that not just that you're a pediatrician, but you've, I mean, along the years, you've also been to many war torn areas, areas like Yemen, Syria, Greece on medical missions. And also, you have just authored a book called Just One: A Journey of Perseverance and Conviction. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up writing this book?
So I'm a Syrian American physician. I live in Chicago with my family and I have four children. And when the Syrian conflict began in 2011, I was fortuitously or impromptu invited on a medical mission. And that medical mission really changed the trajectory of my life. I had
Mm.
two young children at the time. They were ages uh, two and one, almost one.
Oh,
And I
wow.
left them with my parents and my in-laws and traveled to the border of Syria and Turkey to serve the first wave of Syrian refugees that arrived in Turkey in 2011. And back then there was 8,000 refugees, and now there's over
Hmm.
6 million.
Right.
And this Syrian conflict continues. And then a few years after that, as we saw the wave of refugees traveling across Europe, and there was a big anti refugee sentiment across Europe
Hmm.
and even in the United States, I, along with the rest of the world, saw that image of little Aylan al Kurdi, the 3 year old
Hmm.
boy whose body washed up on a Turkish shore. And at that time, I had three children, and my youngest was about 2 years old, kind of the same age, same body size as little Aylan al Kurdi. And the day before, I had just posted a picture of my little 2 year old running after a squirrel. And just imagining that I could have been on a boat with my children trying to cross the sea into Europe,
Hmm.
trying to seek security. So I just couldn't get his image out of my head. And so then I just decided that I was going to go to Greece and serve that population of refugees. And so I was there for, a little less than 2 weeks. And then, um, and then the Syrian, refugee crisis and the Syrian crisis continued. And it just seemed to me that it would just, flash. It was like a flash in the pan in the news. And we would hear about it a little bit, and Syrians might get like, okay, maybe this is going to change, maybe this incident will change, maybe the targeting of healthcare workers, if we highlight that, maybe it'll do something, maybe if we highlight the use of chemical weapons in Syria, somebody will care, maybe if we, like all of these things that we
Hmm.
thought maybe someone will care. And it just seemed like no, the international community didn't really care. And then a few years after that, the international medical organization called Med Global was forming, and I was on their board. And the war in Yemen had started, and we had decided that that would be the maiden mission for that organization. And so I was invited on that mission, and I went there in 2018. And as the planning of the mission went on, I surprisingly found out I was pregnant.
Oh.
And so then there was a bifurcation there. Like, am I still going to go on this trip? It was a,
Mm.
the pregnancy was a surprise. But I ended up going, and the impetus to write a book, like I never thought I would write a book. So that wasn't something
Mm.
on my radar as I was growing up. I always knew I wanted to be a doctor, but an author wasn't that anything on my radar. But in 2018, I had traveled to California after I had the baby. And I had met somebody named Mukhtar Al Khanchali, who's a Yemeni American coffee entrepreneur. And we had been talking, a friend of mine introduced me to him. And he was saying how he had just fled Yemen during the war, and I was like, oh, I just fled Yemen during the war too. And so we had got to talking, and a book was written about him by the famous American author named Dave Eggers,
Mm-hmm.
highlighting his trip to Yemen and the history of coffee. And so Mukhtar and Dave Eggers came to Chicago a year after that on a book tour. And so I had told my husband, I'm like, oh, I met Mukhtar, and let's go to this book tour. So we go, and there was all of these older white American people coming to this book tour, and it just showed me the power of the story. Like I felt that,
Right.
maybe these people would have never been able to identify Yemen on a map before this book, but here they
Right.
are, listening to this. So that was really the impetus to write the book,
Mm-hmm.
just to get the Syrian crisis back on the map somewhere, and hoping that it will change the trajectory of, the Syrian people. And then the earthquake happened in February,
Mm-hmm.
and I had not planned to publish early. I had planned to publish like after Ramadan, because I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
Ramadan comes and you kind of just, need to just focus. And but I know a lot of people felt the same way who are in the humanitarian sector. Like I just felt so antsy, like I need to do something, after
Right.
that earthquake. So that pushed me to just publish early in March,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's been kind of where I've been in the last month. Like after Ramadan, I'm just now starting to kind of talk about the book, kind of trying to publicize the message. For me, it's more the message of the book, and I just want the message of the book to get out there. And so this is really out of my comfort zone, like podcasts and talking. I'm pretty
Right.
introverted, but it's important. The message of the book is very important to me. So here we are.
Yeah. So if you could like guide my audience as to where the book begins and what's the meat and bones of it. I know you talked about the Syrian conflict, but again, just a little bit of details of what is within the book.
Right. So the book starts. So part of the book is like lots of flashbacks. So it,
Mm-hmm.
it starts with how we're organizing for this Yemen trip, and all
Mm-hmm.
of these text messages that are coming back and forth. And then it kind of flashes back to 2011 with that first trip to the Syrian-Turkish border.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it also talks a bit about my experience as a Muslim American in a post 9/11 world. When 9/11 happened, I was in medical school. And obviously, that had a big impact on my life as a Muslim American.
Right.
Um, and just our community was under big scrutiny from the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
and that included me being picked up for an interview by the FBI.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, so there's a lot of things in the book that highlight different um, different issues I faced as a Muslim American,
Mm-hmm.
as a woman in healthcare, being either a patient or being a Muslim physician myself. Just talks about little, like, I guess, areas of prejudice that maybe we don't recognize that we have against other people, and
Right.
how it affects us. And then, so then the book goes on to talk about the beginning of the Syrian crisis, that trip to Turkey, the trip to Greece, and people who I met there, and really like what the refugees who had fled by sea, what they've experienced,
Mm-hmm.
um, and um, and then goes on to talk about the trip to Yemen, and then ends with a chapter on COVID and how I experienced COVID. As I'm actually a pediatric infectious disease physician, so
Mm-hmm.
my subspecialty is infectious diseases. So obviously, the COVID pandemic was something that I took very seriously, and had
Right.
to, I had to like do a lot of research, and had to do a lot of uh, new protocols, isolation, and what we treatment protocols, look at a lot of treatment protocols for children with this newly emerging pathogen, and what I did for the Muslim or non-Muslim community in terms of like education. I know a lot of us were scared in the beginning. There was a lot of fear, as
Right.
I'm sure you remember, when the world locked down and we didn't know what was happening and where this was going. And so I always tried to be reassuring, but at the same time, making sure that people were listening to public health advisors and
Right.
epidemiologists and people in the field, and not like listening to these wacko ideas that perhaps people who weren't in science or who weren't experts in the
Y'all were
field
trying,
were,
but the rest of
were
us
spending.
were only half listening, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's where the book ends. Uh, so yeah, that's kind of the details of it.
No, I mean, again, I think it's such an important perspective, especially coming from somebody who's Muslim and who's who's been at the center of trying to help people in war zones. And that's why I have you in the Gift of the Gab, not just to feature your book. Again, it's very important. I think what most people don't realize is that we see war as a grown up thing, that it's just between grown up people. Um, if you could, like in your experience, with the Syrian conflict, the war in Yemen, and, all the places that you have been, if you could please speak to the fact that wars is not just about grown up people immigrating and dying in war. Unfortunately, that's the only way I can put it. But it has a very real impact on children, which sort of become an invisible, so almost invisible casualty to all of this. You had mentioned the young boy who was washed up on shore. That image, it shook the world only because it was one of the few times they were made very uncomfortable by the real impact of war because he was such a small boy.
Yeah, so of course, the impact on children is tremendous.
Mm,
Some of the things that we see in children, and when they're stressed like this, when they're having to, either listen to bombs falling down in their homes, or they lose family members, parents, cousins, siblings, or then they have to pick up and move, and they have no idea why they're walking thousands of miles, why their parents are
mm-hmm.
making them walk thousands of miles, food scarcity, new places. So a lot of times we see regression, developmental regression. So that can look like the child used to walk but no longer walks, or
Oh,
he
wow.
used to talk but no longer talks.
Mm,
They start wetting the bed after they had been potty trained for a long time.
mm,
Um, those are some of the small, and I say they're small because there's a lot of like major impacts. Like, how do they deal with stress moving
right.
forward? Can they trust people? Can they trust humanity after being in such difficult positions? And especially, if you think about the Syrian crisis has been going on for 12 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody born in 2011 or 2010, they've spent their whole childhood, all they
Right.
know is war and immigration and refugee status, and then even like the earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria in
Mm,
February. Some of those people, some of those people have not lived in the same place uh, in 1 year. So
mm,
they've been displaced 20 times in 12
right.
years. So that means
Right.
not living in the same place for 1 year. And it just, what kind of impact does that have on a child not living in, I mean, we all know, as as parents or physicians, pediatricians, we know that one of the most important things for children is stability and a
Right.
routine. And
Right.
that just goes out the door when you're a refugee or when you're a victim of war. There's no
Mm-hmm.
stability, there's no security, there's no routine, because every day is a different challenge. So yes, of course, the impact on children is tremendous, and I just think you're right. Like, nobody wants to talk about it because it makes us
Mm,
uncomfortable. Instead, we want to talk about weapons and, I don't know, other things, but nobody wants to talk about, like, what is the impact of war or being a refugee on a child. And I think that's a tremendous impact, and it's, scars them for life or changes their psychosocial development for life, undoubtedly.
right. And again, I think that that's why what you do when, and I couldn't even fathom this, Dr. Akhras, that you have small children of your own. You were pregnant one of those times, and you went. It's incredible, testament to your conviction to this. But again, I can't imagine how hard it is, and your family, that you are going into an area of conflict for sure, that it's a risk to you, a heavy risk to you. And I mean, did that ever occur to you that you might not be able to make it back?
Oh yeah, it did. I mean, whether it was during like being on the Turkish-Syrian border,
Hmm.
seeing, Syrian land across the border and knowing what was going on over there and knowing that physicians who were treating the opposition or, people who were in protests, those physicians or healthcare workers were being arrested by the government and
Oh
tortured.
wow.
So yeah, of course that thought did cross my mind. There were times that I was like, oh my God, like I hope I make it back to my family alive, inshallah,
Mm, right,
And then in Yemen too, in Yemen, we were escorted by military escort the whole time.
right.
But I think one of the things that just keeps me going is that I always imagine myself in their position. Like I always imagine myself like what would happen to me if I was a mom with two small children in a refugee camp. I really would hope somebody would come help me.
Right,
And so
right.
that always and I think part of the part of living in the West, quote unquote, or in what we feel is a secure country is this like complacency or this, we think that that's never going to happen to me, you know.
Right,
I
right.
think that's a common denominator, whether you're Muslim, not Muslim, whatever it
Hmm.
is. We live in countries where we think, well, that conflict is over there. It's never going to
Right.
happen here. This doesn't affect me. This is not me. This is those people. And that's simply just not true. And I think that's one of the take home points for me has always been like, this could happen to me. This could
Hmm.
happen, whether even here in the United States. I think people think we're so safe and that's never going to happen. But
Right.
how close did we come to maybe a civil war on January 6th?
Oh,
Or even if you
yes.
talk to if you talk to like people from Ukraine, okay?
Right,
Even
right.
though there was we knew Russia was heading there, like we all heard it on our national public radio or wherever
Right.
you get your news. But if you talk to people in Ukraine, the month before the war, they didn't expect the war to come, even though we
Right.
all knew, like we all saw it coming.
Right.
And then when it happened, they were like in shock and disbelief that how
Right.
is this happening to us? And I think now even like looking at the Sudan conflict,
Right.
like the people in Sudan minding their own business, and all of a sudden
Hmm.
there's this big conflict, and now we have all of these people trying to flee Sudan
Right.
because of a war that they
Right.
that they didn't
Right.
expect to happen either. So I just think it's delusional to think that that will never happen to me or that can't happen here or
Right.
that's just stuff that happens over there. So
Right.
that's really what kept me going because I feel like it could happen here and I would want somebody to help me.
I think, again, that's a very valid point. But ultimately, I think what should be our, I guess, our main motivator is that not just that what if, it's just that it's the right thing to do because
Yeah.
there are people who are suffering. And it's not just because you help people who look like you. That's not how it should be, or who have the same beliefs as you. Again, if we believe in humanity as a whole, we need to help people who are in genuine crisis. And the people, the places you've been to, these people, as you'd mentioned, Syria, 12 years. I have a 12-year-old. Like, again, as you'd mentioned, a child born in 2010, 2011 has not seen a day without war and conflict. And I'm 40. I can't even imagine a, a lifetime of that. Most of us can't. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. Everybody deserves to live in peace and just have some stability in their own lives. So again, I think the fact that you've written this perspective in your book, if I had to ask like one question, like what is it that A, you hope people take away after reading your book, and B, what can they do to be better or to help people in need?
I think the take home point is that any of us can help. And I think,
Hmm.
we underestimate what we can do and we think, oh, I'm just one person. What can I do? I'm not going to
Hmm.
change anything. And that's simply
Right.
not true. I
Right.
think any of us can change the perspective or the trajectory of somebody else's life.
Mm.
And I think it's important to remember that about ourselves, and to, believe in ourselves and in our ability to help people. Um, So that's really the take home point of the book. And then
Mm-hmm.
what can people do to help? I think staying informed is the first thing, and then
Right.
just being empathetic and looking at people from a lens of compassion, from a lens of like can you imagine yourself in their position, being
Right.
empathetic. And then there's so many ways to help people, whether that's in your local area or internationally. A lot of areas have refugee centers or refugee organizations that support refugees, so you can look those up, see what they need. Sometimes refugee families just want someone to help them navigate the new city, or
Right.
help them figure out where their children should go to school, or just little things like that, like, or help them with navigate the mail or the transport system in the
Mm-hmm.
city. So those are small things that you can do. Some refugee agencies have like after school tutoring that you can get involved in,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of help children also again start to feel safe again, start to feel like this new country is their home.
Right.
So those are small things too. Donating supplies, clothes, food, car seats, things like that. Um, and donating to organizations that are working on the ground that are supporting medical relief. Oh, which I
Right.
forgot to mention that a part of the proceeds of the book is going to Med Global, because Med Global is an international NGO, medical NGO that's been on the ground in the Syria-Turkey border since before the earthquake, and they did a lot of work soon after the earthquake and continue to do work.
Mm-hmm.
They're one of the only organizations that's getting into northwest Syria, because that area is not governed by the Syrian government, and so
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of issues getting medical aid in that area during the earthquake, and a lot of it had to go through Turkey.
Right.
So donating to organizations like that. So those are like a few ways that one can get involved and help themselves.
Right. I will have a link to Met Global in the show notes. They can also see the link on the screen. So before I conclude, please tell everybody where they can buy your book, Just One, A Journey of Perseverance and Conviction, and where can they find you online or on social media?
Yeah, so my book can be purchased either through my website, which is nourakhras.com, nourakhras.com, or through Amazon. It's on Amazon, or through Barnes and Noble. Um, and and you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Nour Akhras MD, on Facebook, Nour Akhras, and I'm not so much on Twitter, but I am there, Nour Akhras MD, and I have like a LinkedIn that I don't really participate too much in either. But I'm mostly on Facebook and Instagram.
And everybody can see those links on the screen, and I will also have those links in my bio. Thank you so much, Dr. Akhras. I think what you do and the perspective you have is so imperative for people to really understand and get deeper into. War is not something people like talking about, but it is a reality that exists in this world, unfortunately. And the work you do with the people who need it the most is absolutely admirable, which is why I had you here. Thank you so much to you, Dr. Akhras, and to everybody who's listened in and watched us on YouTube. Y'all take care of yourself, and may peace be on you all.